We were putting songs on Napster and calling them Green Day New Demo and putting like Cartel song on that and like getting it distributed to millions of people.
Welcome, everyone, to This Was The Scene, the podcast that takes a look back at the late 90s, early 2000 punk scene. I am your host, Mike Doyle. Before we start, thank you to all of the people who are patrons over on my Patreon. You've kept the lights on here for many years, and you kick fucking ass. If you too would like to kick ass and only spend $1 a month, then head to patreon.com/thiswasthescene to join the Cool Kids Club. The Militia Group was founded in 1998 by Chad Pearson as a booking agency, booking for artists such as Slick Shoes, Craig's Brother, Dogwood, 238, Acceptance, and Element 101. In 2000, Pearson teamed up with Rory Felton to turn the agency into an independent record label based out of Huntington Beach, California. Some of the bands they signed were Rufio, Ratchet, Copeland, The Rocket Summer, Acceptance, and Cartel. The Militia Group stopped releasing new music in 2012, though its back catalog is still in print. There's so many bands from this label that I fucking love, especially Copeland. I'm a huge Copeland fan, and that Chroma album by Cartel was just fucking fire. So I was pretty excited to get Rory on the Skype, which I did, and this is what we chat about. The Kansas City scene, putting out records when he was 16, Revelations distribution, Noise Ratchet, The Rocket Summer, Cartel, Getting Burned Out, and a ton more. This week's sponsor is Mint 400 Records. Mint 400 Records is an indie record label from New Jersey with bands across the United States, Canada, and Europe. The label features everything from indie rock and folk to post-punk and soul. Over 400 exciting releases. You can find Mint 400 Records releases streaming at Spotify, Pandora, Tidal, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Deezer, and more, or at all MP3 outlets worldwide. Visit mint400records.com for links and more info. Here's a clip from their artist Yawn Mower's song 16 Minutes from their forthcoming release, To Each Their Own Coat.
16 minutes till it hits. My baby's on the pitch, and I'm left waiting for a kick. Shortstop is the kid most likely to fall.
Thank you, Mr. Sabatino, for always supporting the podcast. If you'd like to as well, just email thiswasthescene@gmail.com. Lastly, I have a comic on Instagram you want to go follow. It's Your Daily Bread. It's called Daily Bread, but the account name is Your Daily Bread. So you can go on Instagram and find that. I do daily posts, just little doodles every day, and I've been doing it for over 4 years, so you can check that out. That's all I got to say, so feel free to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with anyone who would love some punk rock nostalgia. With that said, you know the fucking deal. Yeah, I'm excited for this because there's a lot of bands on Militia Group that I was fans of, and still, even to this day, I was thinking of, and I want to talk about this compilation that you did where it introduced me to Branston and that song Escapist.
Yeah.
And I just found that again the other day on Spotify and added it to my own Spotify list and have been like playing that on repeat because I loved that fucking song.
Man, I was a fan of all those bands. Huge fan of Branson. They've been doing some really cool vinyl lately of some of their records.
So yeah, so like kind of start off on, because this whole thing's about the scene, and I know Militia Group started in 2000, it says, but it seems to me like you probably were involved in the scene prior to that. So how did you get involved in the scene in general?
So I went to high school in Kansas City. My family's Australian. We immigrated to Kansas City in the 90s and discovered my passion for music as a 12-year-old, 13-year-old around that age, middle school, and got turned onto punk rock initially as a 13-year-old. Loved the energy, the freedom of expression, and at the same time started to play in bands. So I played in punk bands, and that merged into more heavier bands from like age 13 to 16, and was involved very much in like the local punk scene. There was sort of a similar thread happening in Kansas City at the time with what later sort of got categorized as emo, with bands like Boys Life and Giant's Chair, and then later Get Up Kids. Initially, I was really a punk kid or a pop punk kid, and that sort of overlapped with hardcore. And
Actually, real quick, because I don't think I've had anybody on who has talked about the Kansas City scene. So in fact, it's usually like
Oh
Chicago.
yeah.
Yeah, like I'm from Jersey, so I grew up in that scene, but then it's like Chicago, LA. Yeah, like what was that scene like? Was it because other scenes they'd be Legion Hall based or club based, so that's like a technical aspect of it. So like how are shows done in that area?
So in Kansas City, there was a revolving door of quote all ages clubs, some more professional and licensed than others. And we would do shows at VFW halls. We would do shows in warehouses and basements. We would have touring acts come through and play a basement to like 200 people, and the kids would just go crazy. Yeah, we loved it. That's what it was a lot like back then. Kansas City and Lawrence are kind of connected by a 20-mile freeway called the K10. Even though they're distinct towns, they had a similar culture on the music side. A lot of the music came out of Lawrence because that's where KU is. That was a college town. And there was a venue in Lawrence called the Outhouse, which was literally a brick of concrete in the middle of a cornfield. And it still exists to this day. I don't think it's a music venue anymore. It was a place where in the early 90s and I think even the late 80s, like they had lots of later legendary bands perform, like Nirvana toured there, Bad Brains, all sorts of bands. And so it was very much a gritty, gnarly kind of scene in some respects. When I came around in the mid 90s, when I got into music, and there was a handful of all ages clubs around Kansas City, I got involved in booking regional acts. So the acts would come through, they play at a club like El Torreon or G Coffee, and oftentimes just spend the night at my parents' basement, which is where we would host people. There was a place called New Earth Cafe where other artists, it wasn't really a cafe as much as just a basement where bands would play. But yeah, there's a variety of places like that catered to punk, hardcore, pop punk, even ska at the time, everything sort of in between. And there was, man, we would find all sorts of venues to play at that were really horrible. And I don't know why we didn't just focus on one or two, which seems to make the most sense. But we would do shows in parks. Like we would get licenses to do like a show in a park and just get a generator and invite a bunch of bands and just do a free show outside. I remember booking acts from Minnesota, a band called Fed by Ravens that actually a few of those members became Torrance, which was one of the first artists we signed it on the Militia Group. But I met them because I just booked their band down in Kansas City. I probably found me through AOL, like just something random. And I just was a kid who loved music and loved the scene. And I still remember like having all those printed zines with like Dillinger Escape Plan and Dillinger 4. And we'd go up to Chicago, like growing up in Kansas City, if you got a show in Chicago at the Fireside Bowl, that was like, we finally broke out of Kansas City. It was like the big thing. And then we'd host shows for all the Omaha bands too, like Bright Eyes and The Faint. And I remember one time my hardcore band opened up for The Faint at a VFW hall, and we always looked at Omaha as like the little brother, and then of course the Omaha scene just blew up. And I remember just, being from Kansas City, always being a little jealous. And like, oh man, Kansas City was where it's at. Like the Get Up Kids, Casket Lottery, Coalesce. I mean, I used to see shows with all these artists on one roster, one lineup, and it was so sick.
Like who?
Get Up Kids, Coalesce, Casket Lottery, the Appleseed Cast, all on one lineup, maybe even Cursive, and there'd be 100 people there, 150, 200 people there, maybe even in a church or like a warehouse. There's a lot of churches in Kansas City, obviously. Just random places wherever these bands would play, and that would be our weekend. That'd be the thing we do. Oh, let's go hang out at the show all day. And I was like we were like, me and my friends were all the high school kids at the show, and in a certain sense idolized these guitarists and vocalists for these bands. And
there was such a big feeling of like the bands coming out of there. I felt like I don't know, I felt like you guys kind of had that Chicago vibe.
Yeah, I feel like Vagrant Records tapped it in the year 2000, right when I moved to LA. I remember one of the first shows I went to in LA. Well, first I saw like Pedro the Lion at the Glass House with Death Cab opened up for David. And then, which I thought was fun looking back on it. I saw the Get Up Kids headline the House of Blues in LA. This is like one of my first shows in LA. And it sold out. And I remember thinking like, Kansas City's made it, Kansas City's on the map. Like our hometown boys sold out the bigger club venue in LA, and Reggie and the Full Effect opened, and the Anniversary opened. I drove to Lawrence, Kansas for my 18th birthday to see the Anniversary CD release party for Designing a Nervous Breakdown, and the Appleseed Cast had opened up. I think a band called Everest opened up as well. It was at the Bottleneck, and I used to have to sneak in the back door of the Bottleneck, like, because I was under 18, and in Kansas City, or in Kansas, they had 18 and over clubs, not just 21 and up. And as a high school, I remember like the drummer of Sunny Day allowed me to carry his snare drum in the back door to get in the club, like shit like that. It was so cool. Like, or, there's multiple times I'd sneak in the back door at the Bottleneck, and every time a musician would see me and laugh or smile and knew exactly what I was doing, but it was the only way to get into the show.
So real quick, I just have to, because Kansas City, I was always confused. Like when I would be on tour, we'd be coming to Kansas City, and I'd have the map open. I'd be confused because I was like,
Yeah.
well, where, is it in Missouri or is it in Kansas? I was like, what the fuck? So in New Jersey, there's this divide between Taylor ham and pork roll. It's like this stupid thing that the north and the south part of Jersey has this thing about. And it's like a funny thing that goes on. It's like a whole Jersey thing. But like for you guys in the scene in Kansas City, is there some weird kind of ownership of which side is the city, or do you guys like this not even a thing? Like in the scene, or just in general there?
So Kansas City was its own thing. There was a suburb of Kansas City, or multiple suburbs, contained in a county called Johnson County, otherwise known as JoCo. And that was considered, more the affluent neighborhood. So if you're from Johnson County, people would put you into a type of bucket. Obviously, that's where I grew up. That was the suburbs, right? It's where my parents lived. Where the most of Kansas City's in Missouri, but there really wasn't a big difference. The one thing we would joke about is if you lived on the Kansas side, if you recall in U.S. history, Kansas was a free state, Missouri was a slave state, and so we would definitely like hold it over people from Missouri that we were on the right side of history.
You're a bit more
as if like I had anything to say with that. Yeah. But from a scene perspective, no, nothing to do with the music. Yeah.
Okay, because I wonder, because there's always like, the scene was very inclusive until I think later on it became more, like I say, it's all time like a fashion show, and you never know in certain areas where they're kind of like, oh yeah, like fuck you, or I don't know. I figured it was just a question that was top of mind. I was like, I have to ask this.
Geographically speaking, no, there weren't any really dividers. There seems to be a natural progression where no matter where you grew up in Kansas City, if you were a musician, you ended up in Lawrence for a period of time, because Lawrence was where like it's where a lot of the musicians lived. It was more of a creative escape. There was a studio in between Lawrence and Kansas City in Eudora, Kansas, which is literally just a road, that was originally called Red House and became Black Lodge Studios. There was a producer there named Ed Rose that did early Get Up Kids and a bunch of artists from that era.
Oh yeah.
And that studio was, it was literally like, it was really cool. It was probably one of the only recording studios of that quality in that area.
Did he do 4 Minute Mile?
No, they did that up in Chicago. He might have been a part of it. I know that he did some of their, he might have done Woodson. We could look him up and see what he's done. He mixed a couple records for us, produced a couple records for the Militia Group, Ed Rose. He definitely had a connection to the scene there, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, he did the split with them and Coalesce, it says.
Yeah, he did a lot in that scene. Oh yeah, like Rob Pope, Ryan Pope. When we had he remixed a record for us or he recorded a Beautiful Mistake record, and I think he remixed an Anna Divine record for us. And I remember being there with the Beautiful Mistake the first few days they recorded there, because they stayed at my parents' house. It was just really cool being there and hearing what he had to say and talking about, these were all records we loved and grew up with and were obsessed with.
Yeah. Actually, he did Red Letter Day, too.
Yeah, I'm saying Eudora, Woodson. He did Coalesce, Emery, Casket Lottery, Boys Life, Appleseed Cast, Reggie and the Full Effect, Small Brown Bike. I feel like he could have done a lot more. Ultimate Fake Book. He even did Puddle of Mud, which was like,
oh wow,
not a scene band, but
yeah,
definitely was a band for a while. And I feel like if yeah, Ed should have got more work, if that makes sense. And yeah, I don't know why he didn't get more work out of the records he was attached to, but he should have.
So how does this lead to you starting the label? Because I know you did it with Chad Pearson.
Yeah, so I started putting out records when I was 16 as a hobby. True story. My friend Jason Irvine, who we're actually still good friends to this day, is from Louisville, Kentucky. We met on AOL. He wanted to start an indie label. I wanted to start an indie label. And we were like, let's just do it together. And we didn't know what to do. We figured out how to like manufacture a CD. We were trying to figure out how to talk to distributors, how to get the CD into stores. He was friends with Brett Detter, who was a guitarist in Zao at the time. And Brett had a side project called the Juliana Theory. And Brett and Jason knew each other, and somehow it came to be that Jason and my label called Arise Records ended up pressing, our first release was a split EP from the Juliana Theory and Dawson High back in 1998.
Yep. Yeah.
And
I interviewed Jeff Kish. We talked about that.
wow, so that was a long time ago. That was my first foray, and that sold a few thousand copies, and it was our first experience like not being able to keep up in manufacturing and dealing with all these like we were just kids, like we didn't know what we were doing really, and we were just trying to figure it out, and it was a lot of fun. And thanks to Brett, like he gave us some chance to start producing some records, and we did, and we got it through some distributors. We were distributing through Initial Records, which was like a big Louisville label at the time, and Jason was still working there. And Jason and I did a couple other releases under Arise Records. We did a EP from the National Acrobat, who I actually happened to see in Louisville at the Mercury Room opening for At the Drive-In back in 1998 or 99. Maybe oh, no, it was also Elliot was on that show. Elliot, At the Drive-In, and the National Acrobat. My parents said I had to go to college, so I found colleges that had a music industry degree, because that was the only thing I wanted to do, was continue putting out records and figuring out how to work in music. Got into USC. They had a music industry program. I wasn't actually originally going to go and accept their acceptance, but a friend of mine convinced me to do it, and so I did. And so on August 23rd, 2000, I moved out to LA to go to USC, and probably within 4 months, I was bored enough with college that I was like, I'm going to start another record label. And in college, I was taking all these classes on music business and learning basics around recording contracts, which we had never even used in the high school hobby label, as I call it. And I remember just one night thinking, I'm going to start a label, but this time it's going to be a real label, unlike my hobby. And I remember being up all night writing out the plan for it, like how many artists to sign initially, how to get distribution, how to market the records. And I had developed a relationship with Chad Pearson, who was doing a booking company under the name or moniker the Militia Group for a year or two. And I was like, hey, Chad, have you thought about turning Militia into a label? And he said he had, but he didn't have the funding for it. And I was like, well, I think I can get the funding through a bank loan. And so right then and there, he and I 50-50 went partners on creating the Militia Group as a record label. And we got a bank loan, which was co-signed by my parents. God bless them. I'd seen some bands play locally, like Rufio, and Chad had relationships with artists that were up and coming through his days touring with his bands that he also booked, like Element 101. And I think he booked tours for a lot of bands in that Tooth and Nail era, if that makes sense. Yeah, so we signed first 5 artists were Rufio, which was a band I'd seen out in Rancho Cucamonga through a friend of mine from college who actually took me to go see them. And I just literally saw them and was like, someone should sign these guys. I would even make the point that I think it was at the show that I saw Rufio that I was convinced to start a label to sign them because they were so good. Yeah, that's what I remember thinking back on it now. So we signed Rufio, we signed Torrance, Veronica, the Lindsay Diaries, Veronica and Lindsay Diaries were friends of Chad from touring, all wonderful people. Torrance was members of this band Fed by Ravens, which is from Minneapolis, kind of making this really like gnarly version of neo-punk, which was really fascinating and fun. And then soon after that, we signed sort of like, at the time we thought was like the biggest band we had signed, called Noise Ratchet, which was this kind of emo punk band out of San Diego area. And that was our plan. Like, all right, let's get 5 artists and put them out. And the next step was trying to get distribution. So we took our plan to Revelation Records, a famous hardcore label, and somehow just shot our shot, you know? And we're like, hey, we're having a label. We're going to put some money into it. We're not rich, but we're not dirt broke. Would you be interested in distributing us? Because we knew we couldn't go to a real distributor or, you know, at any time right now. And shockingly, they said yes. And so they sent over a contract. We spent no time negotiating. We just signed it and sent it back to them. And we had a distributor.
How did that work though? So you guys, what you would do is you'd pay for a band. This is my view. A band would record, so either you pay for it, they pay for it out of pocket, and then the artwork's done, so you pay someone to do the graphics for that. You package the whole CD, so then you buy X amount of CDs as the label, and then you hand them over to Revelation and say, all right, you guys put these into all the places that you have connections with?
Sort of. So yes, we would pay for everything, the recording, the production, the artwork, the physical manufacturing of the compact disc or the medium that contained the music. You'd have to create all these marketing tools for Revelation Records to quote unquote sell to one-stops and retailers.
Okay.
So one-stops were like middlemen that big retailers would buy from, and then also small retailers like mom and pops would buy from as well. But then Revelation also sold direct to some people as well. They had direct relationships. And so it would become sort of a one sheet in their sales book, which would go out to all these prospective buyers. And buyers in retail stores would buy up front, or, you know, in the CD world, everything was fully refundable or returnable. So stores knew they could buy like 10, but they could return them all if none sold. Everything's sort of on consignment. So labels could get into trouble if you made 20,000 CDs and 18,000 came back. Like, that can happen. That could be a bad situation. I think I probably had a record like that later on. But
on top of that, though, like, because it sounds like you were really fucking savvy in the beginning you're going to college, you're like, I think I'm kind of seeing past this, what I want to do. I just want to jump fucking feet first into the music industry. You start a label because you already had your feet wet a little bit before that, and then you get a bank loan. It seemed like you were a little bit further ahead about the technical stuff and what you needed to do.
I benefited because my parents were lifelong business owners and entrepreneurs. So, you know, it's like as a child, all I saw were my parents. They worked together, actually. They're still married. They worked together. They ran their own small business in the agriculture business. And I think I just saw that. And so even going to college, this thought of like, oh, you go to college for 4 years, you get a secondary degree, you go at an entry-level job at a big company and work your way up, and then you go start your business. Like, as a kid, you know, you just don't know what you don't know. You know what you see in front of you, and that's what I saw. Like, oh, you just start a business, and for me, it doesn't feel like a business. It felt like a project. It felt like a creative project. It was never about the money, right? It was always the fact that like we started selling records was kind of a shock to us. like I remember the Rufio record, their first one, Perhaps I Suppose, our very first release. I think we did like 2 ads in a print magazine and bought some ads on some digital websites at the time covering music, and it sold 350 copies. And I remember our distributor being like, whoa, what have you got here? Like, at the time, that was a big deal for an unknown label. All sorts of like challenges happened right away. Like our Revelations distributor, because they were a record company as well, that had a main distributor, actually filed Chapter 11 during this time. And our CDs, mainly Rufio's, couldn't get into retailers for months. and we actually lost tremendous sales because of that. And we were such a small fish in this bigger situation that there was not much we could do about it. I remember hearing stories later on that, like, I forget the name of this company. They were what's called a one stop. But when they filed Chapter 11, Death Row Records literally like drove semi trucks to their warehouse and just said, "You're giving us our CDs back," and they just went in and took them.
Holy shit.
Yeah. Whereas, like, we were such small fish, we couldn't think to even do that. So we ended up finding this guy, James Cho, who worked at Vagrant Records. And I was like, James, can you help us get our CDs into stores, because we're kind of being blocked through this situation. And somehow we found a way to sell direct to Hot Topic at the time. And that opened up tremendous value for us. Like, Hot Topic for about 9 months to 12 months was literally the only retailer where you could find the Rufio CD. And I mean, we sold large numbers of Rufio CDs and t-shirts through Hot Topic. It was an amazing time for music, or for pop punk at that time, the scene, if you will.
Yeah, I remember that. I mean, that was the thing. Like, there was a mall in the Rockaway Mall in New Jersey, and there was a Hot Topic in there. That would be the place, because it was so much closer to where we lived. We'd go there to be like, I wonder if they have any local. That's, you'd see probably like Less Than Jake and all Epitaph stuff and Fat Record shit there. But I think you'd see like some labels that were kind of creeping in that weren't that like that bigger, like Fat Record, Epitaph thing. I think I remember seeing some Rufio shit.
They did right by us, which was really nice. And the buyers there, like, were really nice. And it was, for us as a kid, it was a cool experience. And, we had success with that. We had this band Noise Ratchet. I mean, we put out this EP. A lot of people probably don't even remember them, but they got courted heavily by major labels. This was like when Thursday got signed to Island. And there was like this big rush for major labels to sign emo punk bands. And Noise Ratchet got swept up in that hoopla and ended up signing to American Records, which was, Rick Rubin's label. I remember, like, being at a Noise Ratchet show in San Diego in a warehouse with like 800 kids jumping all over each other, screaming every word, super fun to watch. And Rick Rubin's just there, like, bobbing his head. And I remember thinking, like, this is so cool. Like, Rick Rubin's into like a band I helped have a part of, And so when they got hot, and then that sort of started to bring around what I call like real distributors. Like, Revelation's traditionally a record company, but they're also our distributor in the hardcore world. And Jordan there, by the way, like, big thanks to him for taking a risk on the Militia Group early on. Like, very thankful for that opportunity. But we got introduced to a distributor called Red, who's owned by Sony, in like 2002 or 3. And sorry, did that beg a question?
No, I was just saying, yeah. My ex-brother-in-law used to work for Red.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
So
Tim Brennan.
At the time, oh, cool. So at the time, there was like 2 or 3 of the premier independent label distributors. You had Red, which is owned by Sony, 88, which is owned by Warner's, and maybe like 1 or 2 others out there. And Koch was a distributor at the time. That was the big independent one. And I remember going to this dinner that was set up by James Cho, who had joined the company at that point as kind of like our head of sales. And it was Chad, James, and I, and we went to dinner at this steak restaurant in Santa Monica. And I'm a 19 to 20-year-old kid at the time. Again, grew up middle class, never experienced poverty, but like not used to fancy restaurants at all in any capacity. And just being like very awkward and not understanding sort of how it all worked. Like, should I order the truffles that come on the steak? Like, I didn't know what I should order, what I shouldn't. And they ordered wine for the table, and I had to clarify I'm not allowed to drink wine. I wasn't of age. And this guy, Ken Antonelli, who ran the company, and Alan Becker, like, right then and there offered us a distribution deal with a multi six-figure advance. And I remember just being like shocked, like, whoa. I felt like so much money at the time. It was a lot of money, but I was just shocked that they would just do it. And I remember asking Ken, what did you see? Like, how'd you know this? Because obviously we went on to do, tens of millions of dollars in revenue for them. And he's like, look, you guys were just in the scene, literally. You were a part of it. It was real. It was authentic. It wasn't like some 50-year-old guy trying to start a record label and develop artists. We were just literally young people, a part of the scene, signing our friends, if you will. And kudos to him for seeing that, and big thank you to him and Alan for taking that first risk on us. That was a big deal. So then we kind of bumped up to a bigger distributor. We had more resources. We were able to sign a couple new artists. We signed the Rocket Summer. We signed Copeland. Copeland just literally sent in a demo, or they didn't. Their early label did. The first label did, and Chad loved it, and we signed them. And we almost signed a band called Fall Out Boy. I flew to Chicago. We flew to Chicago twice. I think I don't remember this, but someone told me this, that on their front cover art for their first album, there's a bent couch or a bent futon, and that apparently I bent it when I slept on it. I don't remember that, but someone told me that.
Okay.
I remember we were supposed to sign them, and then they asked for management, so we introduced them to a fledgling management company at the time, or an upstart management company called Crush, who were great guys, by the way. Jonathan Daniel, Bob McClin, all those guys are really great. And we got the management, but then they got another offer from Fueled by Ramen. And what was interesting about the Fueled by offer, it was funded by Island, right? So we couldn't compete with that money, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally.
And Island was really savvy, and they funded independent labels to sign artists, but they let the independent labels own everything. That's really smart. Sony tried to do it where they still owned it.
Wait, so they did what?
Well, you know what? It's hard for me. I don't know all the details. What it appeared to be is that Island helped Fueled by Ramen fund their record deals, but let Fueled by as a company own the masters. But Island would benefit from the future records, if that makes sense. Whereas Sony, I felt like they always wanted to have more ownership in everything. And they were just they had a little less long-term vision, I think, for sort of the evolving independent music scene, independent record labels, and how to find a model that worked for everyone.
With all this happening around, from your perspective and looking back from the eyes you have now and everything and all the experience you've had from that point till present day, looking back in that conversation where Red, where they just gave you that deal, do you think they were, do you feel like they were being legit, or did they kind of see something else that you didn't?
In what sense? Sorry.
Because I mean, it was they said they gave you a good amount of money to distribute. So at the time you were kind of what, am I missing something? They're like, no, we just respect that you're in the scene. So looking back, you're like, yeah, they were legit. They just really respected that.
Yeah, I think that, these were older guys, not from the scene, but they at least had the wherewithal to understand what was real and what wasn't. Yeah, and they were pretty savvy. They signed our what they were doing was kind of like A&R, but for record labels. In fact, if you want to interview someone, you should probably also interview Alan Becker, because he signed a lot of these artists, a lot of these labels, like Trustkill Records, I think even Ferret Records, before they went to Warner's, was going through Red. He signed a lot of these scene labels that were happening. They saw it happening from a 30,000 foot view.
So what was the day to day? Because at this time you kind of just covered from 2000 up until about 2003. So you got 3 years that all this is going down. What's the day to day look like? Where's your office? Are you just doing a ton of phone calls? What did that look like for those 3 years?
So I was initially in a dorm room apartment at USC for the first year. For the summer, I lived in it was actually called the Militia House, but it was with 5 dudes in a house in Huntington Beach. I shared a room with Aaron from a band called Stairwell. I think my rent was $200 a month. I slept on an air mattress on the floor. That was kind of our office. We had a computer there. And then the second year of college, I also had an apartment just off campus. And inherently my room there became my office, and we had CDs stacked up against our walls. Chad lived for a period of time, I think, in that house in Huntington, but also moved into a different house. He had a girlfriend at the time. I think he moved in with his girlfriend. And so we didn't have an office. I eventually was able to convince Rufio went on to Nitro Records. And we had this, because at the time, like, we were just kids in college and couldn't figure it out, or just we're too early and no one wanted to stick with us at the time, which I don't hold against people by any means. I remember I had an offer on the table for like, I think it was like $50,000 to like buy the Rufio record from us. And we got some advice actually from someone saying, don't do it. And that was the best advice we ever probably received during that time. But I remember taking that to my music industry professor, being like, hey, look, I got this label thing. Like, people are offering me money. Like what should I do? And the advice I received was to just leave school and do it full time. That was sort of the vote of confidence I passed on to my parents to sort of give me the freedom to do that. So after 2 years of school, I left, and I think I moved down to Huntington Beach because that's where Chad's sort of home base was at the time. And we opened up our first office, which was off of Warner and Beach Boulevard? I think it was around that corner, or Golden West Boulevard, maybe. It's been a moment, obviously. And so we had an office there, like a 3-room office. I remember it was $600 a month in rent. And I remember moving into the office made everything feel very real, and everything started to speed up. So that was our office for a while. And then we jumped into an office in Anaheim because we had more space. And then we jumped into an office in Garden Grove, which kind of became like the most well-known office from 2004 to 2007 or 8. And then we had an office in Long Beach.
Were you like freaked out at all as it starts to grow?
Never freaked out. I never freaked out. Because at the time, it's like, it feels like a really big deal. But like, even looking back, like doing this interview, I think sometimes it's kind of funny that people are still interested in like this thing I did when I was a kid. Like my wife, she didn't grow up in the scene. And when I try to explain to her, like, yeah, babe, like there was this time when like, you know, people would come and buy a lot of tickets to go see the bands I worked with. And, you know, we would sell 10,000 records plus in the first week on some of our records. And it was a thing. It was like a real situation. She kind of laughs and like rolls her eyes and is like, yeah, right. Like no one, like it wasn't a big deal. But it was. It
It's
really
such
was.
a big deal, dude. Like I'm reaching out to people because they were such an intricate part, even for me personally. Like, you know, this is my podcast, so I'm going to talk to the people that and the labels and things that influence me. But so many releases. I mean, Jesus Christ, fucking that Tunes 04 compliments the Militia Group comp. Love Drug, I saw them with Piebald, so I bought their CD.
Okay. Yeah.
Copeland, I'm a giant Copeland fan. Let Go, I just talked to Jamie from the Stereo and he talked about like that. You know, it's like there's so many fucking Cartel when Chroma came out. It's so much shit, man.
Yeah, there is. That's cool. I mean, I love it and I appreciate it. And I'm still a fan of all those records and I love all those bands.
Yeah.
I think, you know, you struggle with sorry about that. You struggle with like your identity a bit in like, you know, like your identity becomes your job versus who you are separate from that. Yeah, I just definitely struggled with that as it got bigger, if that makes sense. And, you know, as you get older, because I started the label so young, your musical tastes evolve in your 20s and you want to work with a broader range of music, but you had established a label that had a brand and sort of a sound. And so I always felt a little bit stuck in what I'll call the scene, which again, I love all that music, but I also wanted to work with, I don't know, more hipster artists, if you will, but they didn't want to sign to the Militia Group.
I was going to ask you that because I felt you guys, even though I'm looking through the roster and like Rufio is different than Love Drug, but Love Drug can fall in line with Copeland and like Let Go. There's kind of like a rock, but like, I can't explain it, but I always thought Militia Group had a very particular sound to it. Did you feel that?
Yeah, definitely. And what's interesting is like that wasn't necessarily on purpose. It was something that kind of naturally happened. We had a mastering guy that did a lot of our records, Gavin Lurson, And I would go there to Hollywood to his mastering studio because it was always, the record sounded the biggest and brightest there, right? And that's on those speakers. He would always comment like, "Oh, like all your records kind of have a similar fidelity range." And I was like, you're absolutely right. Definitely heavy on the guitars, not necessarily full punk. Well, maybe Rufio was, but most of it was just like heavy guitars. And, in the sort of what I'll call like mid years, we signed some more adult artists, and they didn't always do as well as sort of the younger sound of music. And I think that was also part of the tension. We wanted to work with, artists and people who were established and had audiences, but sometimes that conflicted with the idea of signing like the hottest new young thing that might pop off. And, as we all know in music, sometimes that hot young thing costs less and does better than spending so much time trying to invest in a labor of love with an established project that you just love.
Do you think like Rocket Summer to me, it was a solo guy who called himself Rocket Summer, right?
Yes, he's still playing. He still plays shows and sells lots of tickets.
So I remember he came out the same time as that dude who was on MTV with the TV show, Ryan something. He was like friends with Ashley Simpson. Do you remember this?
Yeah, the guy that dated Ashley Simpson?
Yeah, he like feathered his hair and all that shit. But I feel like for some reason I saw that and I thought he was ripping off the Rocket Summer.
Probably, maybe.
Yeah, but like, what the fuck was his name? But I mean, like, I guess my point was
He's
that
still going though. Like I ran into him at a thing a few years ago.
who, the guy from Rocket Summer?
No, Ryan Cabrera.
Ryan Cabrera. That's what I'm talking about. But I feel like Rocket Summer like that because it kind of to what you were saying is signing like the hot new thing it's like less to invest in like they pop off a bit more. Like, do you feel like Rocket Summer? I mean, because it was like that seemed different to me from the rest of the bands on the label. Where you kind of were you stepping outside of the label and signing him, or am I seeing this wrong? And you're like, no, he fit into the label perfectly.
Who, the Rocket Summer?
Yeah, because it seemed like that was a chance to be like, let me kind of open this door up here to more of the poppy, like, audience.
So I got a tape of the Rocket Summer performing on the Edge radio station in Dallas from one of his friends. And I became obsessed with those songs. I think they all ended up on the first record. At the time, we felt he fit right in with everything. At the time, the label itself was only like 3 people. As the label grew within team members, like eventually we got to like, 10 or 20 people, it actually was harder to sign a band like Cartel at that time. In fact, many people at the label fought me on that decision.
Why?
Which is, again, the people at the label, we were going through a personality crisis of trying to be more indie hipster, or like the music we liked was coming out of New York and Brooklyn. I was like, guys, this is a slam dunk. Like the band's writing great songs. And I remember it took me weeks to like convince my partner and other people that we should sign Cartel. And I loved it from the get-go. To me, it's like, look, the brand had established a brand within a world, i.e. the scene, pop punk, emo, indie, the whole thing. Why not just continue, if we found an artist in that category, we should do it. I think there was sort of debate whether we should, I don't know if the word would be pivot to more, I don't know, music that would appeal to people in their late 20s.
I mean, was Chroma the first release?
We did it. We re-released their EP called Lucky Street. Or no, it was called the Ransom EP, and I had a track called Lucky Street on it. I remember like they put in the work, man. Cartel they would tour in a van, they come out, they play like this record shop or music store in California. I remember driving out with them to Palm Springs to play at like some crappy burger and beer place. And they were just putting in the work, man. They really just wanted it. And then I remember going down to Atlanta to help them make Chroma, the record. I was in the studio. I remember doing gang vocals on one of the songs, Burn the City Down, I think. I just remember like this record. I just remember thinking this record's going to be huge.
Yeah.
This band's making an incredible sound. They were in this scene, but doing something a little bit more fresh and unique. fortunately, I wasn't the only one. I think a lot of people saw that. I think the one challenge with Cartel is all the labels called us right away. They wanted to sign them, and the band was made for pop radio. I mean, they were made for the mainstream. I just felt like all of us should have spoken up and said, look, let's develop it for another 6 to 12 months, sort of in the scene prior going to radio and MTV. But they still had success. They had a hit. I just felt like they could have had a longer career and should have. They deserved it. They were that good.
It was almost like what Paramore was built to be, and then they ended up doing it. Like I remember hearing that. I mean, who knows if this is real, but I remember like hearing Haley's dad wanted her to be really embedded in the punk scene, so when they finally blew up, she'd have these like roots.
I don't know anything about that, but I remember her records were awesome. I remember knowing someone on their team and seeing them side stage at the Wiltern, and they were great. They put on a killer show.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like kind of like what you wanted with Cartel is to be like, let's get them to be more embraced in this foundation first before like throwing them to like the radio or like MTV.
Yeah, and they had done these tours. I just, looking obviously at everything in hindsight's 2020, it's like, man, if we just gave them another 6 months to a year, sort of doing the dirty, gritty clubs, they would have their roots would have been thicker as they go to mainstream radio and everything else. But such as major labels and trying to make success in music, it's so hard, it's so complex. It's timing, it's luck, it's right song, right time, right place, all of the above.
I remember my buddy gave me Chroma. He's like, dude, you've got to hear this fucking CD. It's so catchy. And I listened to it. I was like, I don't even know what to think about this. Like, I'm like, I love every song on this fucking CD.
Oh yeah, the whole record's so good. I remember being in Japan on tour with them. During a sound check, they played Q&A in full. And I was like me and like 4 other people in this like club just watching the sound check and just being so stoked that like I got to experience that, because the end of that record was so special. No one else in pop punk was doing that. And I just remember just thought they really were like at another level versus so many other artists.
So like, were you guys getting affected by the whole download thing?
Yes. Yeah, we definitely were. It was hard to sort of like fully it was hard to fully calculate it or quantify it, and there was a period where it actually wasn't affecting us, and then it became real apparent like in 2008, I think. It was like a slow drain at some point, and we were sort of leveraging new technologies like Napster. We were putting songs on Napster and calling them Green Day New Demo and putting like Cartel song on that and like getting it distributed to millions of people. Maybe that was Rufio. And we found new ways to sort of hack MySpace to win Yahoo Who's Next, which was a big channel at the time to promote new artists. But downloads definitely caught up to the business in probably 2007, 2008. And that became really hard because streaming hadn't taken off. iTunes was okay, but music was essentially free to everyone for a period of time. CDs had really dropped off and definitely got affected. Yeah, it definitely, affected everything. That combined with the label's deal structure with Sony changed, and the label did another distribution deal with a company called Razor and Tie, and that got really complex, which it's not worth getting into. And Sony had obviously bought the major assets or artists from the record company, i.e. Cartel. They actually bought Copeland from us, and a lot of people don't know that. Or what happened was, I think Columbia, soon after that, Rick Rubin became the chairman of Columbia and probably dropped a lot of the artists on the roster, which happens when like new leadership comes in. So I think for all 6 months, something like that, Copeland was on Columbia Records. And they also bought Love Drug from us. A lot of people don't know that they bought Love Drug from us, and then we actually re-signed Love Drug after they released them. Very confusing time.
So like, I mean, was there a moment you can remember where things are going good, you're living off the label, you're making a living, and all of a sudden one day you're starting to see, like, was it a slow down, like was it a slow slope, I guess?
Yeah, it was definitely like a slow
Decline?
Avalanche, right? And I think in some ways I was not prepared to understand it at this time, and there were so many other factors happening like all at the same time. You know, our big records were getting taken by major labels. Like we're trying to figure out what to do as a strategy. Distribution was kind of being confusing. Like, was it worth even for a moment? It was like, do we even own the records anymore? It's like why own the records? Like, is there any like for a moment it was like, is there any value in the master? Obviously 2022 there's huge value in the masters, but I remember thinking that for a moment, like, how do we participate? How do you make a business work developing artists? And that combined with me being burnt out working with in this industry for a decade nonstop, just living and breathing music. I would go to shows 7 days a week. It was exhausting, man. It was really tiring. I got really burnt out. And I remember around like 2010, I definitely was like, I don't know if I want to continue doing this. 2008 through 2010, we were doing a few records, but definitely not as many as we were. It was more of a slow roll at that point. Just trying to figure out like what's next, like how's the industry going to work? Like how are you going to make this work as a business? 2010, I actually re-signed Rufio, and we put out their fourth album called Anybody Out There. And that got tied into like distribution challenges as well. But that was a great record that unfortunately not a lot of people got exposure to. There's so many records I feel came out between 2008, 2012 or 13 that just didn't get exposure to people because it was so hard to promote independent records at the time.
Was Spotify out at that point?
I think it was out in Europe. I forget when exactly it came to the US, but that was a slow build. Like it wasn't, there was multiple streaming platforms at the time. One called Mog, one called RDIO. Pandora was thrown in the same bucket.
Yeah, Pandora. Pandora was cool. It was just like, it was weird because you couldn't skip around. Then Spotify came out, and that was like, oh, wow.
Yeah, Spotify, what was interesting is like there were products on the market that mimicked Spotify prior to its launch. For whatever reason, they just had the hype, they had the buzz, and they had a great user experience. I remember subscribing to it through a VPN because it wasn't available in the US at the time. So I remember being really early on and trying to convince everyone like, oh yeah, streaming is the way to go. I mean, even when iTunes came out, that was so revolutionary for downloads. I remember record companies still had a problem decoupling songs from the album, and we were like, no, let's just do it all. This is how we can go make money, you know. This is how artists can make money. So yeah, I sort of stopped putting out new music under the Militia Group brand 2010 or 11, I think was like the last one. There was never really like, you know, the record, the catalog was tied up in different distributors and financial complexity for a period of time, but it's, you know, it's still available and people love listening to all the music and it's great. It's exciting to see, you know.
What was like the final? I typically would ask way more, but I want to just make sure I don't cut into your time. Like, what was like the final decision where the label just stopped?
I think it was the Rufio record because the rollout was so that last one. The rollout was complicated because of distribution at the time, and at that point I think I kind of realized like I don't know how the economics work for being an independent record company right now. And this, in fact, we made a couple records and we ended up actually joint venturing with Vagrant Records to release them. Again, that was like one of the Appleseed Cast albums was like that, Sagar Matha. And so we did a couple things like that. It was really like unknown, like we were just trying things from the hip, you know? And then I got pulled into sort of management projects. I got pulled into the tech side of music. I started helping people. That's what kind of I got really excited about was like tech products for the music industry. So there was a product back then that allowed labels and artists to take all their music off of torrent websites through a click of a button. Essentially, like, you know, through the DMCA, you have to claim that you have to request a takedown. So we made it very easy for people to request takedowns. that was a product they're working on for a while. And then a lot of people don't know this, or it's not really been covered. I actually worked at a social commerce company for 3 to 4 years called Chirpify from like 2012 to 2015. And I ran all sorts of social commerce campaigns for artists like Gaga and Snoop Dogg, Tim McGraw, Green Day, Jason Aldean, Warner Music, Republic Records, Ariana, all sorts of artists we did campaigns for, helping them sell music and merchandise in social media. Yeah, and then I took a couple of years overseas as a break and came back and fell back into artist management again. And just working with artists and finding ways to develop them through technology has been my passion in the last couple of years.
I was going to say, I was like, the music industry is such a hard industry to me, from my perspective, a hard industry to like make it, I guess. And it's what makes you keep going back to an industry that's so difficult?
Yeah, it's kind of the 10,000 hours rule. Like I have so many hours of experience in this world. I can build upon that experience to create new technology for artists to help them create massive new revenue streams. That's more interesting to me than trying to start all over, if you will, in a different industry. And the music industry is sort of wider defined now than it was 10 years ago. Like you can work at Apple and still be in the music industry, right? It's much more broader now, I think, than maybe it was even 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's obviously much more valuable. I mean, it's amazing to see all the record companies, not just the majors, but independents really come back thriving in the last 5 years, last 7 years. And artists too, like the opportunities in 2022 for artists to make a living making music is incredible. It is way more easier now. Can I say that? Is that proper English?
Sure.
Than it was 20 years ago. Like artists complain about Spotify royalties, and I'm not saying they don't have a point, but I'm saying it was a lot more difficult trying to sell CDs out of the back of your van going on tour in 1998 with a Rand McNally map before Google Maps than it is today, trying to build an audience on social media and then monetizing through your music, your content, and new technology that's out right now.
Yeah, totally. All right, man. So before I ask the last two questions, wrap this up, is there a story that you've always wanted to tell? It doesn't have to be like crazy, but just like an interesting story, a funny story, whatever it is you feel comfortable telling that you've wanted to tell, and then through years of being interviewed, you've never got a chance to, and now you can.
Man, I wish I had this question beforehand because I'm sure it'll like hit me afterwards.
Like watching a show or something behind the scenes that went fucking crazy, or an album that almost didn't get released or something like that.
I remember like South by Southwest, Paul and I we jumped the fence to get into a show of Death from Above 1979, like in a parking lot. And I just remember doing that as a kid, like quote unquote, I ran this indie label, but I was still the kid who was like jumping fences to get into parties and shows.
I always respected labels that were still that scrappy, I guess you'd say. Like if I saw some label, be like, dude, that actually makes me like that label a bit more. Seeing them just be like, yeah, fuck it, just got that punk rock in me.
Yeah, I feel like starting the Militia Group at 18 with Chad, he was like 23 or 25 at the time. Like I was still the kid that was younger than all the artists we worked with. I wasn't like the 40-year-old starting the label that all the 20-year-old kids signed to. I was like, the 18-year-old kid signing the 23-year-old artists. And
I didn't even think about that. That must have been an interesting perspective when you're younger than the bands that you're signing, and they're like trusting you for the business side.
Yeah, I remember just always being younger than everyone, and I still to this day feel really young at heart, even though I'm probably older than most people I work with now. Yeah.
All right, cool. So I'll wrap it up. Before I ask the last question, what would you like to promote? It could be about you. It could be about a friend. It could be about both.
Oh, that's a great question. I'm going to promote I'm going to promote my friend's band Watashi Wa. Seth Roberts of Watashi Wa has been making music for 2 decades from Central California. He was been on Tooth and Nail Records. I think we actually did an EP with him. under one of his monikers at the Militia Group, and now he's actually back on Tooth and Nail Records, and he's got an incredible record coming out called People Like People, and I'm really excited for it and excited for him. And I'll just say I'm really excited for new technology that's coming out that's going to help artists create new revenue streams in new ways outside of traditional, I don't know, financial flows in the industry. And I'm just really excited about what's coming soon.
All right, last question. What scene ethics do you hold on to this day?
I definitely still feel punk rock in that I don't feel like anyone can tell me that I can't do something I'm going to do. And just having the confidence or the persistence to push through. I don't know if that's a scene ethic, but it's something I feel like I got from punk rock. And I see a bit of it in people like Kanye West, obviously to a much larger extreme probably in him. But I just really resonate with that attitude of like, oh, you can't do that. You know, you're not qualified, or that's not going to work. Like still trying to find a way to make it work.